Hi, I'm Dr. Lauren. It's my pleasure to have you all here. This is amazing. It's the biggest client education night we've ever had yet. So I hope you guys all got some snacks and drinks and everything and you're situated. And this is going to be a great one. It's my pleasure to introduce Shane Tyler. He works at the dog park here and he's done a ton of stuff for the curriculum and helped all of us with dog handling, and he'll tell you in more detail his education and background because he'll do it better than I ever will, so I'll let him introduce himself. But yeah, today we'll talk about understanding dog body language. The one thing I'll say before I hand over the mic to Shane is that Danny, the little border collie in the back, it's Danny's birthday, so there's some treats in the back left corner, so feel free to grab a little baggie before you go home. Thank you very much, and thank you all for being here.
Hello. Like Dr. Lauren said, my name is Shane Tyler. I own Peaceful Pups 101. I've been studying canine behavior in general for probably about a little over 12 years now. Officially started my own training business 10 years ago. A lot of my training I did actually overseas, and I studied with a lot of different trainers that are, throughout Europe. I felt like a lot of the styles over there tended to sync more with my own views and philosophies and that sort of stuff. So like I said, I've been training for about 10 years now. I currently have 5 dogs of my own, plus a stepdog. Plus 2 foster dogs at the moment. I've worked with a lot of different rescues, different vet clinics, boarding facilities. I've done a lot of assessments for different rescues and city and county animal shelters. And one thing that I've noticed throughout the years is how surprising it is in terms of, even like on the professional level, how much people tend to miss when they're dealing with dogs and reading their body language and being able to understand what the dog is essentially trying to tell us. They have the verbal cues, but they rely so heavily upon body language. And I feel like we as people have kind of lost touch in a lot of ways with being able to recognize some of those more subtle visual cues. So just really quickly, raise of hands, who feels like they've got a pretty good gauge on being able to read a dog's body language? Okay, a few. All right. So hopefully, even with the ones that are raising their hands, by the end of today, you're still gonna have learned something new. That's gonna it's gonna change your own views on, as you're looking at those cute, funny Facebook videos or YouTube videos or things like that originally it seemed really cute, but when you start noticing all the really small, subtle things, suddenly it's like, oh yeah, that dog's not very comfortable in this situation, or yeah, this dog's not really having a good time. It tends to ruin some of those cute and cuddly videos. But for tonight, the big things that we're going to really focus on is we're going to focus on the different tools that dogs use to communicate with each other and to communicate with us, what their feelings are, their intentions are, what they like, what they don't like, all of that stuff. We're going to talk about how breeding has impacted, for different dogs, their ability to communicate fully. We'll talk about calming signals. Calming signals is a term coined by a Norwegian trainer named Turid Rugaas, that essentially it's very subtle body language cues that dogs will use to try to diffuse a situation, or to calm a situation down, or to avoid conflict, all of those type of things. And then we're going to finish up with dog bite prevention. What are very common mistakes that people tend to make that end up getting themselves bit, and how to avoid those really easy to avoid situations. And then at the very end, we'll also look through a few different videos and have you test your guys' knowledge, see how you guys feel that you've been able to pick up on. So to start with, the first tool that dogs tend to use is going to be posture. So just based off of this picture, how do you guys feel, how do you guys read this dog's body language? Just based off of how it's standing.
On point.
On point, very alert, very aware of what's going on. Confidence, a lot of times upper, raised up body language is going to be a sign of confidence. Versus with this one, a bit more of that relaxed, calm, mellow, easygoing sort of body language. What about with this one? What are the big things that stick out to you in terms of it being nervous or scared or anxious? Hunched back, ducking the head really low, basically trying to make itself look small and as not trying to draw attention to itself. How they stand has a big impact in terms of, even with people. When you're really confident or you're more upright, you're walking with that authority or that confidence, as opposed to when you're a bit more nervous, you just kind of shrink back and kind of keep your distance a little bit more. Another big one is going to be the eyes. Now with the eyes, what are things that you see with this picture? The whites of the eyes. Yeah, essentially it's if it has what's called moon eyes, where you can kind of see that white crescent shape, or if they're really wide, or sometimes it's called whale eyes, where they're just really, really big, and pupils dilated, that sort of a thing. That's typically going to be a dog that is very uncomfortable. They are on edge. They are, their pupils dilate, so that way they can pick up on little tiny movements and be able to react to things quicker should they need to. As opposed to one that's more relaxed, you get those soft eyes, the drooping eyelids. It's one of those things that you can very noticeably tell the difference between. When the eyes look smaller, the eyebrows themselves are a little bit more drooped, as opposed to with this one, you see that eyebrow really raised up. For me, the ears says a ton with the dog. Just at a glance, that's almost my go-to a little bit, as the first thing I look at is how are their ear positions? Because that's going to help give you a good gauge in terms of whether they're alert, whether they're more relaxed, or whether they, more and more nervous. So with this first one, where it's a little bit hard to see with being a darker dog, but what would you guys say in terms of this picture with just how the ears are based?
He's more alert and ready to focus or pay attention.
Yeah, good. Alert. Their ears are pricked forward. Oftentimes they're going to be doing that because they're listening for what's either ahead of them, or their ears will rotate a little bit to whatever the sound is coming from. Versus with this one, it's a little bit more relaxed, where they're just kind of held more, rotated slightly to the sides. There's not quite the tension in the ears. They're still aware of things, but they're not hyper-focused on everything. And then there's this one. This is where you're getting a good idea of how comfortable this dog is. For me, the general rule is the more the dog's ears go pinned back, the more uncomfortable it is. When it goes flat against the back of their head, you need to give that dog some space, because you're pushing it to a point where it may feel the need to defend itself, or it's just so terrified that you're going to traumatize it. Now, one of the tricky things that we run into is that it's easy to see with a dog with pointed ears, but what about the ones that have the floppy ears? So we'll also take a look at examples of that. So with this one, you see where even with the floppy ears, they're kind of rotated forward. And they're more alert, pricked forward. Even though they can't go upright, they're more rotated, so they're almost perpendicular with their head, with the way that they're facing. If it's more relaxed, you see it laying flat, more along the side of their head. And again, they're just holding it loosely. They're not trying to engage with anything. They're not worried about really using their ears too much when they're in this sort of mindset or position. Now, even with the dogs that have these really floppy ears, you can still get them where they're pinning back. Usually though, rather than just going flat against the back of their head, you see them rotate more and more backwards, where you can pretty much see the insides of their ears at that point. Because this is what these type of dogs have to deal with. Bassets, Beagles, Labs, pretty much any dog that's got the floppy ears. You can still get that good gauge, but you just have to learn to adapt, versus where it's more of the satellite ears, the more pricked up, pointed ears. That's a little bit easier to read for a lot of people. But you can still get that same information with the dogs with the floppy ears. Now the mouth is going to be one that a lot of people can misread a little bit. It gives a lot of information, but it sometimes gets a little bit trickier to understand the way that they hold their mouth, their lips, the tension surrounding their mouth, how much they show in terms of gums, how much they show in terms of teeth, all of that stuff. So we'll look at a few examples of this. How do you guys feel about this dog?
Relaxed.
Pretty relaxed.
Happy.
You know, the tongue is kind of out, panting, which can be a sign of, you know, it's warm, it's just been plain, or things like that. But a lot of times, you know, with that tongue out, it's just more of that relaxed, you know, and you can kind of see that with around the face too. How do you feel about this one, though? Let's see how good you guys can read this situation. How much do you have to worry about this dog?
A lot.
See, and for me, yeah, I'm definitely going to be on alert with this dog, but I do not feel immediately in danger. The reason why is because typically a good rule of thumb for me is that the more teeth and the more gums that they're showing, the more it's almost like that bluff, or more of that very clear signal of back up. Just leave me alone. It's kind of like someone posturing and trying to act threatening to keep their distance. You see it the same with this dog. With this dog, where it's got, you know, that tire, you see a lot of the gums, but it's not, you know, for me, it's just kind of that, okay, yeah, if we need to worry a little bit, we need to keep an eye on this dog. But at the same time, a lot of the time when you give it space, it just will leave you alone too. The one that I worry the most about is going to be this dog. Now with this one, you don't see as much of the teeth. I mean, you can see the teeth, but not quite as much. You don't really see the gums, and that skin is pulled really, really tight. Those lips are really tight, and there's a lot of tension in that face. This one is one that you definitely need to be worried about. These other ones, you can kind of see where they're still just kind of, well, this one's a little bit harder to see, obviously, but they're still keeping their distance a little bit. It's just more of that warning of back up. Versus with this one where, and you also see it with the rest of the body language, where it means business. It is not holding back. Does that make sense? Okay. Now obviously, different dogs, you're going to get different variations of this. Behavior is not an exact science. There's going to be variations between individuals, between different animals and species, and sometimes gender can play a factor in all that. So you have to be a little bit flexible when you're dealing with behavior and reading their body language as well. Now let's look at the tail. The tail is another really easy one to help gauge a dog's behavior, their emotions, all of those things. What do you guys feel about with this dog, just based off the tail? Again, it's that alert. Sometimes the higher up that they hold their tail, the more confident the dog is, and the more assertive that they might be. But it's, you know, again, it's usually a sign of that confidence or being alert, on guard, or very aware of what's going on around them. Versus with this one, it's relaxed. It's just kind of held loosely down. Sometimes a good rule to go off of is when it's horizontal to a little bit vertical going down, it's usually more of a relaxed position. Versus when you're dealing with the dog that's got this, you know, obviously very clear that this dog is really uncomfortable. Tail's tucked really far underneath. If we were to go back to look at the posture slide, these pictures look almost identical to the dogs that you see in the posture slide. Like I said, there's a lot of stuff that works together and goes in sync with each other to help give you that whole idea. You can't just go based off of one thing alone, because again, there's going to be different variations between different dogs, personalities, situations, all those kind of things. So you kind of have to look at the big picture. You may be getting one image from one aspect of their body, but then everything else is telling you something different. And so you kind of got to look at it all as a big package. One thing, while we're still on the subject of tails, one thing that I do want to make sure to get across, and this is a very common misconception for a lot of people with their dogs, a wagging tail does not equal a happy, friendly dog. I have seen a lot of people get bit by a dog that is wagging its tail. Usually the wagging tail is just an indicator, or it's a sign that they're aroused or that they're in that heightened state of emotion. how is the tail being wagged? Is it more loose and just kind of swinging from side to side? Okay, maybe that's a little bit more of a relaxed dog. If it's more tense and more of that really rigid, fast movements, or even that very slow, where you still get that tension in the wag, that's still going to be a dog that's it's in that heightened state of emotion, but that is not one that I would necessarily deem as a friendly dog. So don't get caught up in the misconception that, oh, it's wagging its tail, it must be friendly. Again, look at the whole picture. Don't just focus on one thing and make that mistake. It's a lot like the hackles or the fur along their backs going up. A lot of people see that and immediately think the dog is being aggressive. Again, that's wrong. It just means that they're in that heightened state of emotion. I had a foster dog that anytime he got excited and started to play, his hackles went straight up. And so for a lot of people that were looking at potentially adopting him, that immediately turned him off because, oh my gosh, he's aggressive, when he was just playing. And so it's no different than you getting chills or the hair on your arm going up because it's something that's making you uncomfortable or excited. You know, it could be a variety of different things that gives you that natural knee-jerk reaction that your body just does instinctively. It's the same thing for dogs. So don't get caught up in that misconception that a wagging tail equals a happy, friendly dog. Look at the big picture. Now,
is it harder to tell on a short-tailed dog with the ones that have just like little tails?
we are getting to that right now. So, because in the last couple hundred years, the amount of different types of breeds that we have has exploded, there's naturally going to be some downsides to all these variety of dogs. If I were to say, describe what a tiger looks like, you could easily in your head get a good image of what a tiger looks like. Yeah, there's different types. There may be a couple, orange or whites, that sort of a thing. But at the same time, universally, they look very, very similar. Same thing with wolves, with horses. If I were to give just about any species, you could immediately get a decent picture in your head. Now, what if I say, what does a dog look like? What immediately pops up in your head? It's going to be a huge variety of different dogs, ranging from the little tiny teacup Yorkies to the Irish Wolfhounds or the Neapolitan Mastiffs. Now, with that, we're also going to run into problems in being able to read their body language, and not only us being able to read their body language, potentially them being able to struggling more to read their own body language with other dogs. So we're going to look through a variety of different examples of different types of breeds, and I want you guys to give me what you think the big problems that this dog might run into in terms of communication based on the tools that we've just talked about. So with this one, Bull Terrier. What do you guys feel is going to be some of the big potential issues that it may run into?
Posture.
Posture? What about the posture?
They're so stiff and muscular.
Okay. A lot of those barrel-chested dogs, those really heavy muscular dogs in the chest, it naturally pulls their weight forward. For them, that just might be how they normally stand. But to a person or to another dog that is not familiar with that type of dog, it's going to look very intimidating because it's that leaning forward type of look. And it could immediately put other dogs or even people on edge when they see that. What are some of the other things with Bull Terriers?
The stiff tail.
Stiff tail, good.
They usually hold their tail out a lot, like how it is in the pictures. So
Yeah.
sometimes when they're relaxed, they don't really hold it down and relax like a golden retriever might, but usually they're just kind of out.
Good. So he said the stiff tail, where how it's not necessarily just held relaxed down like a golden retriever or like a border collie, something like that. It's more that stiff, rigid sort of position for a tail. And he's exactly right. You look at Bull Terriers, you look at Pit Bulls, you look at a lot of these, again, bully breeds, the really heavy muscular ones, how they wag their tail is like this. Yeah. You don't get much of a swishy motion at all. It's very stiff. Again, that can throw some dogs or some people off. There's one more thing with the Bull Terrier that really sets it apart from other breeds. Who can pick up on it?
Their face.
What about the face?
It's like egg-shaped, like it doesn't really have that.
Good. You are on point tonight. So the skull of a Bull Terrier has been warped throughout time, where it doesn't have that natural slope. It dips down. It's got that curve. And so again, that for a dog that's not familiar with this, is, well, what are you? You know, you sound like a dog, you smell like a dog, but you don't look like a dog. Okay, so let's look at a couple others. Neapolitan Mastiffs. What do you see as problems for this breed? The jowls, very wrinkly. Again, that very heavy chested that may pull its weight forward. With the jowls, how easy is it for them to bare their teeth and to show you teeth?
It'll take a lot.
It's difficult. The wrinkles in the face, the eyes being really droopy, it's harder to get necessarily a good gauge on the eyes. Good. Okay, this one's going to be a little bit harder to see, but what can you guys see as a problem with this one?
I want to say the ears.
The ears.
Have been already cropped.
They've been cropped.
Yes.
Now this is going to be a subject that is going to get a whole variety of different opinions and things like that. And I always run into people that's, well, my dog's got cropped ears and it's never been a problem. Just because it's not the only deciding factor, it still potentially limits their ability to communicate accurately when those ears are cropped. This is, and now don't get me wrong, there are definitely occasions where it is done for a medical reason. A lot of times those floppy ear dogs are going to be very prone to ear infections because you get moisture in there. It's a warm, moist environment that is going to be a perfect breeding ground for bacteria. And there are times where it is necessary for the safety and well-being of the dog and the health of the dog where they may need to crop the ears to deal with ear infections. A good majority of the time, though, I would say it's either personal preference on people or because the breeder is going off of what different organizations have deemed breed standard. In some situations, unfortunately, you still get the issue of them cropping ears, so that way there's nothing for them to grab onto when they're in dog fighting rings. It's the unfortunate reality. And again, it's not it's not going to be that, yep, because your dog's ears are cropped, they're disabled. But it's another factor that goes into the whole equation of what can be a limiting factor for your dog. Okay, Bassets. What are some of the issues with Bassets?
Very low. Way too long.
The long ears, so it's long body, short legs. There's one really big thing with Bassets that sets them apart in terms of being confusing with reading their body language. Eyes can be one, but there's one bigger one.
I'd say like
Nope, not the jowls. It's going to be the tail.
yeah, how their tails are always upright.
Bassets and Beagles tend to naturally want to hold their tail upright because that's what's comfortable for them. If they held it loose and relaxed down in a downward position, it's dragging on the ground and it's going to be catching on things because they are so low to the ground. For Bassets, it's very common for them to always have their tail upright. Even if they're a little bit more unsure, they're not really confident or on alert or anything like that, that upright tail can still give off that image to other dogs and even to people. And so this is one of the big things for Bassets where that's a comfortable position for most of them, but it doesn't necessarily indicate accurately what their personality or what their feelings and emotions may be. This goes back to your question. You have some breeds that have dock tails. And this is kind of like the cropped ears a little bit where, again, there may be medical reasons to dock a tail. There may be reasons for like working dogs in terms of functionality. So if they're out working in the field, it doesn't get caught on things as they're running to try to herd sheep or drive cattle or things like that. But for most dogs nowadays, it's just kind of that, oh, well, this is what this breed looks like. They're going for the aesthetic look. But how do you gauge how a dog with a very short tail, how they feel? What may be relaxed for them looks the exact same as what a dog tucking their tail underneath their entire body may look like, where it's just not really visible at all.
The rest of their body, like their shoulders and feet.
Yep. The thicker coat, the thicker fur, things like that can kind of hide a little bit of some of their posture, though not as much as this one. What can you see with this dog? You see the tongue because it's got its mouth open, but otherwise you can't see its mouth, you can't see its eyes, its ears, how it's really standing in terms of posture, you can't see a tail. It's a walking mop, essentially. Now, what is the similarity with that in terms of humans? Hoods, hats, eyeglasses, things that are more concealing on the face. This is why a lot of dogs get really uncomfortable, or that stranger danger may really kick in when they can't see your eyes, or that you've got a hood or a hat on, or things that are more concealing of your body. This is very common for a lot of dogs. That people that look like this completely throws them off and it makes them very uncomfortable. The same way that it does for people.
Right.
I mean, if you can't tell like where someone's looking or what they're thinking, that sort of stuff, it starts to make you more and more uncomfortable because you can't predict what they may do or what they may not do. Okay, let's look through a few more. What about this dog? Rhodesian Ridgebacks. The hackles. It looks like their hackles are up all the time because it's a genetic mutation. Whereas for most dogs, again, this is just how it always is, but it may look like to a person that's unfamiliar with this breed, or even to another dog that, okay, this dog is really worked up over something, or it can make them uncomfortable, put them on edge. Now this next one kind of shows a trend that is not quite as popular anymore, but you still see it from time to time, which is the grooming habit of shaving a mohawk into a dog. What does that look like to another dog? Now, as people, we can see that, oh my gosh, that's so cute, and we know that it's just a haircut, but to another dog, you can't explain to them that, no, this is just how their owner decided that they were going to cut their hair. It looks like their hackles are up 24/7. So that's something else to keep in mind. Versus other dogs, which have no hair whatsoever. Can't really see anything in terms of hackles and anything like that. What about this dog?
That's hard.
Yeah. Let's go through the list on this one. I mean, honestly, if we're talking realistically, this is probably the biggest genetic mess in the dog world. Most of them can't be born naturally. They have to be born C-section because the puppies' heads are too big and they can't fit naturally through the birth canal. They have a hard time breathing a lot of the times. They've got the jowls that make it a little bit harder to control the lips easier. They have the little tiny corkscrew tail for a lot of them. The really barrel-chested, the short legs, that really heavy breathing that can make, I mean, it makes any person uncomfortable when you have someone that's a total mouth breather. It could be the same thing for dogs where I don't know what you are. And for these ones, on a behavioral sense, what I have tended to see is that a lot of them tend to have that just one-track mind. Once they get their head stuck on one thing, that's all they can focus on until you can break them of that focus and get them thinking about something else. So they tend to get very obsessive as well. What about this dog? Is this a dog you have to worry about because it's baring its teeth? No. But you still have that underbite, or some dogs have overbites, where it always looks like their teeth are out. And again, you can look at that and, oh yeah, okay, that's just kind of that ugly little cute dog. But to another dog that, ooh, okay, what's your problem? Why are you showing your teeth at me? It can throw them off. Now, something else that we tend to see from time to time, it's not very often, but with things like inbreeding, you tend to have other genetic mutations. This is Nemo. This is actually the dog that is on my business logo, everything like that. Nemo was dropped off at the Animal Care Center 10 years ago. Kind of started this whole debate of what do we do with this dog because he was inbred and had only one front leg. And it was deformed and would have to be amputated. The other one was just this little tiny flipper with a single claw. That's where we came up with the name Nemo. And it was actually me and Dr. Kara that kind of spent a lot of time talking about the whole situation. And our view of it was, even if there's something seriously wrong with him and he only gets a few months, we should at least give him a shot. And so she took care of all of his medical expenses. I fostered him and helped find him a home. 8 years later, he is the happiest dog you could possibly meet. However, because he does have this disability, he tends to overcompensate a lot. With other dogs, he comes on really strong. He will rear up on his back legs and kind of try to lay over the top of the other dog. He's making a point that I'm not going to be pushed around. I'm not an easy target. Because in the wild, he would have been dead.
Right.
There's no way that he could have survived. And I remember that Dr. Kerr had actually taken him home for a few days first and came back and, I'm really worried, will you look at him because he seems really aggressive with the other dogs. And as I was watching his interactions, no, he's just overcompensating. He's trying to make a point that he's not going to be an easy target. So when you have dogs that have disabilities, that have illnesses, that are sick or other genetic problems, because instinctively they're going to be the easy target, you a lot of times will see them overcompensate and come on really strong, and they will act differently than what a normal dog may have been. So does that make sense? Do you have any questions with just some of the ways that breeding impacts behavior? So the next thing we're going to talk about is going to be calming signals. Now with calming signals, like I said in the beginning, this is going to be one of those things where these are common things that dogs will do to try to diffuse a situation, to avoid conflict, sometimes even to calm themselves down. I've seen dogs that they get so excited when it's time to feed that you're sitting there, you're waiting, and they go through this whole routine of calming signals before they finally just, okay, I'm ready. And then they can be fed once they've settled. So we're going to look through several different calming signals. Now with these things, once you start picking up on this and you start actually noticing that, oh, okay, yeah, you're going to start seeing these calming signals everywhere. Go to a park and just watch dogs interact. Take your phone and just make a video and then look back on it later and see how many calming signals that you can pick up on that the dogs are constantly doing. Now, a lot of these things are going to be normal behaviors that you might see in other contexts, but usually when it's done in a calming signal way, these are behaviors that are done out of context. So things such as, you'll see one with yawning. Yeah, a dog's going to yawn when it's tired, but when it's yawning multiple times, and it's not really tired or it hasn't really done anything to make it tired, it's usually going to be a calming signal. They'll lick their lips when they're hungry or they smell food, but if they're doing it in a context in terms of they've just been put under some sort of pressure to some degree, it's going to be a calming signal. Shaking their fur or shaking off like as if they were wet, even though they're not. So we'll look at several of these. The first one is going to be turning the head. Now you see these two dogs that there's that tension going on, and so they're both actively turning their head to look away. And then they can move away and, again, avoid that conflict. Sitting or turning their back. These two dogs have been playing for the last 20 minutes, and one decides, okay, I'm done, and goes and sits down, turns his back, and the other is, oh, okay, and they walk off. They lose that interest. And keep in mind that this just isn't for avoiding conflict. Sometimes it's just to calm a situation down or, okay, I'm a little bit too worked up. I need to settle down. They'll do that. Looking away, now this is a more subtle one than turning the head, where you can see just that eyes shifting, and that's all it is. It's very subtle. It doesn't have to be the full head or turning the whole body. It can just be that moving eyes away. People do the same thing. If you're walking down the street and you make eye contact with a complete stranger, typically you're going to instinctively look away, because if you continue to hold that eye contact, it's pushing that interaction, which gets really uncomfortable and really weird when it's someone that you have no idea who they are. Lying down is going to be another one, just like sitting. It's that way of, okay, I'm not going to do anything, I'm just going to wait it out. And you're also seeing other ones going on too, like the looking away, and then you start to see dogs drifting off and moving away from the front of that kennel. How I would define calming signals in just a single sentence. And she asked if it's a coping mechanism for stress. I mean, it can be, but typically it's going to be something that dogs will do to avoid conflict and to diffuse a situation. Like I said, it doesn't have to be a conflicting or confrontational situations. Sometimes it can just be that two dogs are playing really hard and it starts to get a little bit too worked up, and so they need to calm the situation down before it does carry on to something more conflicting.
Or the dog gets too hyper, like
Yeah.
when you mentioned food. Like, I know, like they get super hyper, so they have to like settle themselves down.
Yeah, essentially, because dogs are a lot like people in terms of you've got this internal conflict going on inside you between thinking and feeling. If you get into a really heated argument, I mean a full-on out fight, screaming match, whatever, it's usually not until you're removed from the situation, oftentimes a couple hours later, that you start to, oh, I should have said this. Or, maybe I shouldn't have said that. That was probably going too far. But when you get in that heat of the moment and you're just reacting, you can't think clearly. And it's the exact same thing with dogs. When they start to get too amped up and those emotions are starting to take over, you stop being able to think clearly and to be able to focus and to learn and that sort of a thing. That's why really I try to get clients to understand that you want calm to be normal. Don't make the excuses that, oh yeah, there's a puppy, or well, it's this sort of breed, of course it's going to be hyperactive. Hyperactivity is not normal for a dog. It's natural for them to want to conserve their energy for when they potentially may need it in terms, instinctively for that survival purpose. So the next one we'll talk about is going to be licking the lips. This is a very common one that you will see, and it's very subtle at times, where all it is just that small little, the tongue flicking out. Sometimes it can be bigger where it's full on licking the nose or licking the whole sides. And like I was mentioning before, yeah, you're going to run into the situations where it's smelling food. Of course the dog is going to lick their lips. But when there's not that food source around, or they're not smelling something that's making them hungry, you're going to see that very subtle licking the lips. Sometimes it's not that subtle. Lifting a paw is also going to be one of those diffusing situations. So you see with this little Chihuahua, she was not super happy about me holding a camera in front of her face. And you're also seeing the looking away. You see little bits of like the tongue flicking out from time to time. So that holding the paw up is going to be one.
What happens, or what is the dog saying when you're petting them and then they just reach their paw up over the top of your arm?
It could be a variety of different things. Sometimes, though, I would say that it may not be completely comfortable in the situation where it's kind of like, okay, just wait, and it's kind of trying to stop you or to slow you down a little bit. Sometimes it's just wanting to have that contact with you. You want, again, look at the big picture. What is the rest of the body language saying? What other calming signals may you be seeing or missing that may help tell you that, okay, yeah, maybe I need to change how I'm scratching or change the position of where I'm scratching. The play bow can be used to initiate play. It can also be used as, okay, I'm not really comfortable with this. She doesn't really look like she's wanting to play very much, but it's still that, okay, all right, just wait. And the great thing about working at the dog park is that I can get so many videos and so many examples. Now, curving is another one. Curving is essentially a polite interaction. It is not very polite for someone to go straight head on towards another person. Same thing with the dog. That's, oh, whoa, what are you doing? And it can throw a dog off. So for them, a lot of them will naturally want to curve or come more to the side. And so you'll see this with one of my own dogs. Even though I've had Sonia for 10 years now, if she does come straight towards me, she immediately sits. And it's not because I've taught her to do that. It's because she's just more of a timid, uneasy dog with a big variety of different reasons. And so for her, she'll either come straight towards me and immediately sit, and more that, okay, or she'll curve around and come side by side, because that's polite. That's non-confrontational. And we'll also talk about how you can use that for how you guys interact with dogs to avoid conflict. There's 4 more that we are going to talk about. One of them is going to be splitting. This is where they want to create that barrier. They go in between 2 dogs, or even people. How many of you have been sitting on a couch with a spouse or a boyfriend or girlfriend, and your dog comes up and forces themselves right in between? Because the best way to avoid danger and conflict is let's give a little bit of space. Make sure everyone is respecting their space. That's a very common reason why dogs are going to do that. It's not because they're necessarily jealous or anything like that. It's more, okay, let's just avoid any potential danger or confrontation here. We're just going to split up a little bit. You're also going to see with shaking off. And this is where it's like if they're wet and they're shaking their fur off. This is going to be something that you will commonly see. But when it's used as a calming signal, a lot of times I'll see this when it is a dog that has just been dropped off for daycare, or you're giving them attention and as soon as you stop, they'll shake off, or you take their collar off and they shake off. It could also be between a tense moment between a couple different dogs. Oh, thank you. I've also seen this a number of times with Dr. Ali, the chiropractor with the Animal Care Center. She'll go through and adjust a dog, and as soon as she finishes, you'll see that, and it's just like with a person that you get this pent-up energy and you just gotta shake off that pent-up energy. Oh, perfect, thank you. All right, so let's look at the splitting. We've got this dog that is just really pestering the other one, and so then you have the other one that just kind of steps in between. And sometimes you see that back and forth motion where it's just creating a barrier. A lot of times you can use this when you have a dog that doesn't react well to other dogs or other people, where you can do what's called parallel walking, where dogs are completely separate from each other by enough distance that they feel okay. Sometimes you have to have multiple people in between as well to act as additional barriers, and then you can gradually start getting them closer and closer as they go, rather than trying to cross each other or immediately confronting those sort of interactions. Yawning is going to be another pretty frequent one that you may see, where it's just like that. Sometimes it's subtle and it's small, sometimes it's repeated over and over again. This was that shaking off that I mentioned earlier. These two dogs are not the biggest friends of each other. This is the first time that they were meeting and they had a bit of a tense moment, and now that they're separating, you see that brief shake off and they can separate and kind of just keep their distance. Slowing down. It's the same thing with a person. If you have a dog that's really nervous, you naturally will just slow everything down. Again, you're seeing a lot of examples with Sonia because she is my gold star student when it comes to calming signals. All right, so let's talk about dog bite prevention. Now with this, approximately there's 4.5 million dog bites each year on average. That's a lot of dog bites. However, with that said, about 81%, and a lot of these statistics come from the CDC, the Center for Disease Control. About 81% of these bites cause very little to no injury and don't really need medical treatment. Now, through a number of studies, the breeds that are most highly represented in bite statistics are going to be a big variety of different breeds. It's not just always this or always that breed. It's going to range anywhere from between German Shepherd dogs, Rotties, Pit Bulls, Jack Russells, Collies, Spaniels, Chihuahuas, Dachshunds, Labs. And that's not to say that these particular breeds are more aggressive by nature. You have to look at a variety of different influencing factors. Labs, there's more of them because everyone thinks that they're the perfect family dog. And so you have a higher chance of coming across a dog that may bite you, that's a lab, than maybe a Tibetan Spaniel. That's not as common. What they have found is that a lot of times you're more likely to be bit by a small or medium-sized dog. However, they don't do as much damage, and so they oftentimes aren't reported as much, as opposed to some of the larger breeds that can do more damage. They have done a number of different studies and found different results when it comes to some of the more stereotypical breeds, like Pit Bulls, for instance. And what they've oftentimes found is that it really comes down more to the environment, where if you're already in a risky neighborhood where there's a lot of crime or things like that, you're more likely to run into a dog that is more prone to biting. They've also found that dogs that are tethered are more likely to bite, and we'll talk about why in a couple minutes. Yeah, so it's one of those things where a lot of times it's the environment. Now, majority of a lot of the bites that happen, the very serious ones that need medical treatment, is either going to happen with children. And it's usually going to be a dog that the child is familiar with, and vice versa. A family dog, a neighbor dog, a family friend, cousins. It's usually going to be a dog that the child knows and has potentially known for a long time. I tell people all the time, never leave your children unsupervised with your dog. It doesn't matter how long the dog has been with the child, how well-tempered the dog is, if you've never had any incidents, because you never know if this little toddler running around is going to trip and fall on the dog while it's asleep, or step on its tail or its paw, or go to give it a hug when it's already in a very tense situation. Those dogs have those knee-jerk reactions. I had a client that initially they called me out because this dog had severe separation anxiety, to the point where it was breaking teeth, pulling bars off the kennel, and chewing through the wall to get into another room. We were working on the separation anxiety, things were progressing with there, and I didn't hear from them for probably several months when I got a phone call saying, we don't know what to do, we're looking at potentially having to put her down because she just attacked one of the children's friends for no reason whatsoever. Was saying that the child wasn't doing anything and the dog just came up and bit him on the face, and now he has to get stitches. That didn't sound right to me, and so I kept pushing and asking more and more questions, and the story eventually evolved to, well, the dog was asleep, the kid came up and decided to lay on top of the dog to give it a hug, and the dad that was supposed to be watching them was in a completely different room and wasn't even watching. So they're going off the story given by the 4 or 5-year-old. That bite could have been very easily prevented. And keep in mind that this was an older lab, had a lot of lumps, bumps, very arthritic. And I mean, there's times where I don't want some random little kid to jump on me and to give me a hug. I'm not gonna have a much better reaction. If I don't know you, no. So many of these bites can be prevented. I always tell people, it doesn't matter how great your dog is, how long they've been with the kids. Never leave them unsupervised because accidents happen. And especially if you're not there to watch it, you're not going to actually know what really happened. But it's usually the dog that pays the price, and potentially the kid that got seriously hurt. But it's usually the dog that pays the price with its life. Yes?
Do you have an age use guideline that you would say it's okay to leave the dog?
With this, so she asked if there's like a general like minimum age guideline. For me, I feel like it comes down more to the maturity of the kid. I know some 5 and 6-year-olds that are way more respectful with their dog than some 12-year-olds.
Right.
And sometimes even older. So really it's kind of varies depending on the kid. Again, it's not this exact science that, yep, they've hit a certain age, so now they're safe. It really comes down to the parents teaching their children how to properly interact with the dog. All right, when dogs are in an uncomfortable situation or potentially dangerous situation, they've got 3 defense mechanisms, which is going to be flight, freeze, and fight. Flight's going to be the first option because it's the safest. Just get out of there and avoid the whole situation, which is also why fight is going to be their last option because it holds the most risk and the most danger. Any behavior in between can pretty much be a freeze. Usually freeze, you're going to see calming signals. Avoiding eye contact, looking away, turning their back. Maybe they go to investigate, but they're curving around because that's less confrontational, it's less risky than going straight towards. Sometimes you're seeing the showing the teeth, growling, barking, hackles going up. That looks similar to fight, but the big difference is that they're still keeping their distance. It's more of that warning of back off, leave me alone. And as long as you give them their space, it's fine. This is why a lot of people will go and say, yeah, my dog is so much more aggressive or fearful or defensive or overreactive on leash versus off. Because as soon as you put them on leash, it takes away that flight option. So they tend to overcompensate. It's the exact same reason why a lot of dogs that are tethered or tied up are going to be more prone to biting than one that may be loose and have that flight option. So again, if it's a dog, especially one that you're not familiar with, that is tied up, leave it alone. Don't push it with it. One really quick verbal thing that we will talk about that dogs do is growling. It is good when you have a dog that growls, which sounds weird, and a lot of people immediately think, oh, my dog's growling, therefore it's being aggressive. Growling is essentially their way of saying, stop. I don't like this. Go away. Leave me alone. Give me space. Back up. And oftentimes, when people hear that growling and they immediately start punishing the dog to try to get them to stop, you're creating a much more dangerous situation of having a dog that is more unpredictable because it's learned not to give warnings. Growling is a good thing. And for me, it's a signal that you need to take a step back, look at why it's growling, and then handle it appropriately. If it's because another kid keeps coming up to it and it's not comfortable with this kid, get the kid out of there. Show the respect to the dog and just leave the dog alone. It's not comfortable with it. Don't approach a dog, let it come to you. This would help prevent so many bites because again, a lot of times when a dog is on leash, people come up, oh my gosh, what a cute dog. And they're doing that sort of reaction. Okay, Sonia, come here. Come on, Sonia. So with my own dog, we've seen her in a number of the videos, and you can see with her that when I go up to her like that, she's immediately sitting, licking her lips, and kind of, more of that timid. As opposed to if I were to, Sonia, come here. Let her come up on her own, she's much more comfortable with it. If you have a dog that's on leash and someone comes up wanting to pet, if you have to, step in front of them and we'll hold on. Even if the dog is completely friendly, lie if you need to. Well, they're really nervous or it takes them a second, let's just let them calm down. And when things have settled, then have them call the dog over. If the dog doesn't come over on its own, sorry, maybe next time. Right. It's when no, come here, and you're dragging the dog over, that it puts them in a situation where I can't run away, so I'm going to freeze, and freeze isn't working because now I'm being forced closer. Famous last words that I hear from people, oh, that's okay, dogs love me, or I'm great with dogs, and then they get bit. Because they keep forcing the issue. Show respect to the dog too. We put unrealistic expectations on these dogs. That's not fair. If they're comfortable, great. They can interact as much as they want. If they're not, don't force them. No more than you would want someone to force you to interact with a person that you can't stand, or someone that makes you feel really, really uncomfortable and unsafe around. Use your own calming signals. Dogs can pick up on calming signals that you give. Using, looking away, avoiding eye contact, turning your back. One of my foster dogs right now is a feral dog. Has never really had socialization with people, and I have been doing a whole lot of coming into a room, walking backwards. Because if this dog is right there and I were to come right, it's going to panic and go taking off running. So there are times where I see it, where I just kind of have to walk backwards to get past it. You can even replicate things like licking the lips, yawning. You can't really do the play bow very much, but sometimes you can do something similar by even just kind of stretching your arms out. Different things like that. You can use your own calming signals and read the situation. If the dog is not comfortable, give it more space. Don't force it. Don't keep pushing it. Okay, so we'll do just one last video really quick. This was the dog that will also demonstrate again that whole interaction of the difference between coming down versus calling them to your side. And even turning and having them come to your side while you're crouched down, and the difference that it can look like. Nope, maybe not. Oh, maybe it's not going to let me. All right, it's not going to work. So, it's the same thing that you saw with Sonia. She is much more comfortable, come here, coming to the side. And also petting underneath the chin is another common thing that dogs are more comfortable with than doing the whole over the top of the head. People automatically think that if it's head shy and ducks away, that it's clearly been abused. No. How many people do you like touching the back of your neck? Not very many. So just wrapping up really quickly. Be aware of what the dog is trying to tell you. Look at those subtle cues. And like I said, go to a park. Go to a store, like a pet store, or to a vet clinic, or just areas where there's a bunch of dogs, and just watch. you will start seeing calming signals everywhere. Look at videos online and you'll start to see calming signals everywhere. And really start to notice those small subtle things so that way you can adjust your own behavior to make sure that the dog feels comfortable themselves. Okay.
So thanks you guys all for coming. If you could stick around for a few minutes if you have questions, that would be awesome. But think about every time you see a child interact with a dog, what did we just teach them to do? What did Shane just teach you about that? Isn't that amazing? So it changes your whole perspective on life and interacting with these creatures. And it's just a huge benefit that we've had to have him here. So please feel free to stay to have questions. I know we're kind of out of time for our online stuff, but if you have questions, you can also send them to us on Facebook or online. Thanks, you guys.